The silence was deafening. Detective Sarah Chen pressed her eye against the scope, her finger hovering just millimeters from the trigger. 156 innocent lives hung in the balance, and in exactly 3.2 seconds, everything would change forever. But to understand how we got to this moment, how a routine Tuesday morning transformed into the most dangerous hostage crisis in the city's history, we need to go back to the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was 9:47 a.m. when the first call came into the Metropolitan Police Department's emergency dispatch center. The voice on the other end was trembling, barely audible over the sound of screaming in the background. "They have guns," the caller whispered. "So many guns. They're in the Meridian Tower, the convention center. There's hundreds of people here and they won't let anyone leave." Detective Sarah Chen was 3 miles away when her radio crackled to life. At 34, she had already earned a reputation as one of the department's most skilled marksmen. But more importantly, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. Her colleagues often joked that ice water ran through her veins, but Sarah knew the truth. Beneath her composed exterior, her heart raced just like everyone else's. The difference was that she had learned to channel that adrenaline into laser-sharp focus. The Meridian Tower stood 42 stories tall in the heart of downtown, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the morning sun. On this particular Tuesday, it was hosting the annual Educational Technology Summit, an event that had drawn teachers, administrators, and education professionals from across the region. What should have been a day of workshops and networking had instead become a nightmare that would test every protocol the police department had ever developed. As Sarah's unmarked sedan raced through the city streets, more details began filtering through the radio. Multiple armed suspects had stormed the building's main conference hall during the opening keynote address. Initial reports suggested at least 4 gunmen, possibly more, all heavily armed and apparently well-coordinated in their assault. They had quickly sealed off all exits and gathered the approximately 156 attendees into the main auditorium. The convention center occupied the building's 3rd through 6th floors, connected by a series of escalators and elevators that the suspects had somehow disabled or blocked. Emergency responders were already establishing a perimeter, but the building's unique design presented unprecedented challenges. The glass walls that gave the conference center its modern, open feel now worked against any potential rescue operation. Sarah arrived at the scene to find controlled chaos. Police cars lined every available street, their red and blue lights painting the surrounding buildings in an urgent strobe. The department's mobile command unit had been deployed, its satellite dishes and communication arrays turning a city bus into a high-tech nerve center. SWAT teams were taking positions at strategic points around the building, while negotiators worked frantically to establish communication with whoever was inside. Captain Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with silver hair and worry lines etched deep into his face, spotted Sarah as she approached the command post. "Chen, thank God you're here," he said, his voice tight with tension. "We've got a situation that's deteriorating by the minute." The initial intelligence briefing painted a grim picture. Security cameras had captured the first moments of the attack before they were systematically disabled. 4 men, all wearing dark clothing and tactical vests, had entered through the main lobby at exactly 9:45 a.m. They moved with military precision, suggesting extensive planning and possibly inside knowledge of the building's security systems. Within minutes, they had herded the summit attendees into the main conference hall and barricaded themselves inside. But what troubled the tactical team most was what they couldn't see. The suspects had been thorough in disabling the building's surveillance system, leaving law enforcement essentially blind to the current situation inside. They had no visual confirmation of the hostages' condition, no clear count of the perpetrators, and no indication of their ultimate demands or motivations. The The building's architectural plans revealed both opportunities and obstacles. The conference center was designed as an open, collaborative space with minimal interior walls. While this would theoretically make it easier to clear once they gained entry, it also meant that the hostages were completely exposed and vulnerable. Any rescue attempt would put all 156 lives at immediate risk. Sarah studied the blueprints with the intensity of a chess master, analyzing a complex endgame. The main conference hall was rectangular, approximately 200 feet long and 150 feet wide, with floor-to-ceiling windows along the east wall. A raised stage occupied the far end where the keynote speaker had been presenting when the attack began. The suspects had presumably taken control of this elevated position, giving them a commanding view of the entire room and all the hostages below. Emergency services had quickly established that normal communication systems within the building had been compromised. The suspects had either jammed cell phone signals or possessed some method of preventing the hostages from making outbound calls. The last communication from inside had been that initial 911 call made in the first moments of chaos before the perpetrators gained complete control. As the morning progressed, the tactical situation became increasingly complex. The building's location in the dense urban core meant that any use of force had to consider the safety of thousands of other people in surrounding buildings. The glass facade that made the Meridian Tower so architecturally striking also meant that any shots fired from outside would have to travel through multiple layers of reinforced glass, significantly affecting accuracy and trajectory. The psychological profile being developed by the department's behavioral analysts suggested they were dealing with sophisticated criminals rather than ideologically motivated terrorists. The precision of the operation, the timing of the attack during a high-profile event, and the complete communications blackout all pointed to individuals with extensive planning capabilities and possibly inside knowledge of the building's security systems. Sarah found herself assigned to the sniper team, positioned on the roof of an adjacent building with a direct line of sight to the conference center's windows. Through her high-powered scope, she could make out shapes moving within the hall, but the combination of tinted glass and distance made it impossible to distinguish between hostages and perpetrators. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part. Every minute that passed increased the psychological pressure on everyone involved. The hostages trapped inside, their families gathering at the police perimeter, and the law enforcement officers who knew that time was rarely on their side in situations like this. Historically, the longer a hostage situation continued, the more likely it was to end in tragedy. By noon, nearly 3 hours after the initial attack, no demands had been communicated. This silence was perhaps more ominous than any list of demands would have been. It suggested that the perpetrators were either still deciding on their course of action or were planning something that didn't require negotiation with authorities. The tactical team had identified several potential entry points, but each came with significant risks. The main entrances were certainly monitored and likely booby-trapped. Alternative access through the building's ventilation system was possible, but would take hours to execute safely. Emergency stairwells offered another option, but the suspects had demonstrated their ability to control the building's infrastructure. As Sarah maintained her overwatch position, she began to notice patterns in the movement visible through the windows. Every 23 minutes, a figure would appear briefly at the eastern window, always the same height, always the same general build. This suggested at least one of the perpetrators was conducting regular perimeter checks, maintaining awareness of the law enforcement presence outside. The afternoon brought new complications. Media helicopters began circling overhead despite police requests to maintain distance. The story was spreading across social media faster than authorities could control the narrative. Family members of the hostages were arriving at the scene, their desperate faces adding emotional weight to an already critical situation. It was during this time that Sarah noticed something that would later prove crucial. In the brief moments when the afternoon sun struck the building's windows at just the right angle, she could see deeper into the conference hall. The hostages appeared to be grouped in the center of the room, seated on the floor in neat rows, but more importantly, she began to distinguish the positions of what appeared to be the armed suspects. The standoff entered its fifth hour as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Sarah Chen had not moved from her position on the adjacent rooftop, her sniper rifle trained on the conference center windows with unwavering precision. Her spotter, Detective Marcus Williams, maintained a constant stream of observations and coordinates, but the tactical situation remained frustratingly static. Inside the mobile command unit, tensions were reaching a breaking point. Captain Rodriguez had been fielding calls from city officials, federal agencies, and media outlets for hours. The FBI's hostage rescue team was en route from their regional headquarters, but their estimated arrival time was still 2 hours away. Local SWAT commanders were growing increasingly concerned about the psychological state of both the hostages and their captors. The breakthrough came at 3:17 p.m., when a maintenance worker who had been trapped in the building's lower levels managed to escape through a service tunnel. His debriefing provided the first detailed intelligence from inside the Meridian Tower since the crisis began. According to his account, he had heard voices speaking in what sounded like Eastern European accents and had observed at least 5 individuals moving through the building's corridors in the hours before the attack, more than the 4 originally identified on security footage. This new information forced a complete reassessment of the tactical situation. If there were additional perpetrators beyond those in the main conference hall, any rescue attempt would need to account for potential threats throughout the building. The possibility of coordinated cells or backup teams added layers of complexity that pushed this crisis far beyond the scope of typical hostage scenarios. Sarah received the updated intelligence through her earpiece while maintaining her overwatch position. The news that they potentially faced more than 4 suspects didn't shake her focus, but it did require adjustments to her mental calculations. Every angle, every potential shot, every possible scenario had to be reconsidered in light of this new information. The psychological profile was also evolving as analysts reviewed every piece of available evidence. The perpetrator's complete silence regarding demands was increasingly unusual. Most hostage takers, whether motivated by money, ideology, or desperation, made their intentions known relatively quickly. The continued absence of any communication suggested either extreme discipline or a plan that didn't require traditional negotiation. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, the department's senior criminal psychologist, arrived at the command post with additional insights. Her preliminary assessment suggested they might be dealing with a highly organized criminal enterprise rather than desperate individuals acting on impulse. The precision of the operation, combined with the sophisticated approach to controlling the building's infrastructure, indicated extensive planning and resources. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in the patterns she had observed through her scope. The regular perimeter checks continued, but the timing had shifted slightly, now occurring every 21 minutes instead of 23. More significantly, she could detect increased movement within the conference hall, suggesting possible agitation among either the hostages or their captors. The thermal imaging equipment that had been deployed revealed heat signatures consistent with a large group of people seated in the center of the conference hall, surrounded by smaller, mobile signatures that appeared to be pacing or patrolling the perimeter. This technology provided valuable tactical intelligence, but still couldn't definitively distinguish between hostages and perpetrators in the complex thermal environment of the modern building. At 4:45 p.m., nearly 7 hours into the crisis, the first communication from inside finally came. A single phone call to the building's main switchboard routed through multiple relays to disguise its origin. The voice was calm, measured, and spoke with a slight accent that linguistic experts would later identify as likely Romanian or Bulgarian. "We require safe passage to the airport and transportation out of the country. We have 156 people who will remain safe as long as our requirements are met. You have until midnight to arrange this. After midnight, we begin reducing our numbers by 10 every hour." The line lasted exactly 47 seconds before the line went dead. No opportunity for negotiation,
no room for discussion, no indication of flexibility in their demands. The deadline was clear, and the consequences for failure were explicitly stated. Captain Rodriguez immediately convened an emergency strategy session. The demands were entirely unrealistic. No law enforcement agency could or would provide safe passage and transportation for armed perpetrators holding over 150 hostages. But the deadline created an urgent timeline that would force decisions within the next 7 hours. Federal authorities were now taking a more active interest in the situation. The FBI's regional office had dispatched additional resources, including their specialized negotiation team and tactical analysts. The possibility of international criminals operating on American soil elevated the incident's priority level and brought additional expertise to bear on the crisis. Sarah's position on the adjacent rooftop gave her a unique perspective on the tactical challenges ahead. Through her scope, she could see that the suspects had positioned themselves strategically throughout the conference hall, making any potential rescue operation extremely difficult. The hostages remained grouped in the center of the room, effectively serving as human shields against any assault from multiple directions. The building's architectural features continued to complicate rescue planning. The floor-to-ceiling windows that provided Sarah's line of sight also meant that any interior assault would be immediately visible to the perpetrators. The open floor plan that had seemed elegant in peacetime now worked entirely in favor of the hostage-takers, providing clear sightlines and eliminating potential cover for rescue teams. As evening approached, additional resources continued to arrive at the scene. The FBI's hostage rescue team had arrived ahead of schedule and was conducting their own assessment of the tactical situation. Their specialized equipment included advanced listening devices that might provide better intelligence about conditions inside the conference hall. The psychological pressure on everyone involved was becoming palpable. Families of the hostages had been moved to a nearby hotel where counselors and victim advocates were providing support, but their anguish was evident to everyone at the scene. The weight of 156 lives pressed down on every decision-maker, from the incident commander to the tactical teams positioning for potential action. Sarah had been in her sniper position for over 8 hours, sustained only by energy bars and water bottles passed up by relief personnel. Her focus remained sharp, but she was acutely aware that fatigue could become a factor as the night progressed. Sniper operations required absolute precision, and even the slightest degradation in performance could have catastrophic consequences. The timeline was becoming critical. With midnight still 7 hours away, tactical planners were developing multiple contingency scenarios. Option A involved attempting to meet the perpetrator's demands for safe passage, though this was considered highly unlikely given the political and legal implications. Option B focused on a coordinated assault designed to neutralize the threats while minimizing casualties among the hostages. Option C involved continued negotiation attempts aimed at extending the deadline and creating opportunities for peaceful resolution. Each option carried enormous risks. Providing safe passage would essentially reward the hostage takers and potentially encourage future similar incidents. A tactical assault in such a confined space with so many innocent lives at stake had a high probability of significant casualties. Extended negotiations might simply delay the inevitable, while increasing the psychological trauma for all involved. The intelligence picture continued to evolve as additional resources were brought to bear. Ground-penetrating radar revealed heat signatures of individuals positioned at strategic points throughout the conference hall. Electronic surveillance detected multiple cell phones within the building, though their signals were being jammed or redirected through sophisticated equipment. Sarah's observations through the sniper scope remained the most reliable real-time intelligence available to the tactical teams. Her detailed reports of movement patterns, positioning, and behavior provided crucial insights that would inform whatever action was ultimately taken. The pressure of being the primary set of eyes for such a critical operation was immense, but her training and experience kept her focused on the technical aspects of the mission. As the sun set behind the city skyline, emergency lighting illuminated the scene around the Meridian Tower. The building itself remained largely dark, with only emergency lighting visible in the stairwells and corridors. The conference hall where the hostages were being held showed no interior lighting, making visual surveillance even more challenging as darkness fell. The approaching night would bring both challenges and opportunities. Darkness might provide cover for potential rescue operations, but it would also make precise target identification much more difficult. The perpetrators might feel more confident in their position, or they might become more paranoid and unpredictable as their deadline approached.
The night descended over the city like a heavy blanket, transforming the hostage crisis into an even more complex and dangerous situation. Sarah Chen adjusted her night vision scope, the familiar green glow allowing her to maintain surveillance of the conference hall even in complete darkness. 8.5 hours into the standoff, fatigue was beginning to creep into her muscles, but her mental focus remained razor-sharp. Inside the mobile command unit, the atmosphere was thick with tension and the quiet hum of electronic equipment. Multiple screens displayed thermal imagery, building schematics, and communication logs. Captain Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, coordinating with federal agents, SWAT commanders, and city officials who had been arriving throughout the evening. The weight of command in such a situation was evident in every line of his face. The FBI's lead negotiator, Special Agent Sarah Martinez, had been attempting to reestablish communication with the hostage-takers for over 2 hours. Multiple phone calls to various numbers associated with the building had gone unanswered. The perpetrators had made their demands clear and apparently saw no need for further discussion. This silence was particularly ominous as the midnight deadline approached. Dr. Hartman's psychological assessment had evolved throughout the day, and her latest briefing painted a troubling picture. The perpetrators' behavior suggested they were prepared for an extended siege and possibly a violent conclusion. Their demand for safe passage might have been a negotiating tactic, but their actions indicated preparation for multiple scenarios, including one that might not require their own survival. At 9:23 p.m., Sarah noticed a significant change in the patterns she had been observing throughout the day. The regular perimeter checks had ceased entirely, and movement within the conference hall had become more erratic and frequent. Through her night vision scope, she could see figures moving more aggressively among the hostages, suggesting increased agitation or preparation for some kind of action. The thermal imaging team confirmed Sarah's observations. Heat signatures within the building indicated that the perpetrators had changed their positions significantly, moving away from the defensive arrangements they had maintained throughout the day. This behavioral shift could indicate either preparation for violence or positioning for an escape attempt. The tactical situation was further complicated by intelligence gathered from the building's security systems. Technical specialists had managed to reactivate some of the building's environmental controls, providing limited information about conditions inside. Carbon dioxide levels in the conference hall were elevated, indicating stress among the occupants, but oxygen levels remained safe. This suggested the perpetrators were maintaining life support systems, possibly indicating they still intended to keep the hostages alive. As 10 p.m. approached, bringing them within 2 hours of the stated deadline, incident commanders faced increasingly difficult decisions. The FBI's hostage rescue team had developed multiple assault scenarios, each with detailed risk assessments and casualty projections. None of the options provided guarantees for the safety of all hostages, but the approaching deadline was forcing consideration of actions that would have seemed unthinkable earlier in the day. Sarah's position gave her a unique insight into the tactical challenges facing any rescue attempt. Through her scope, she could see that the hostages remained grouped in the center of the conference hall, seated in tight rows that would make them extremely difficult to distinguish from potential threats in a rapid assault scenario. The perpetrators had positioned themselves at key points around the perimeter, maintaining clear fields of fire across the entire space. The building's architectural features continued to work against any rescue operation. The floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed Sarah to maintain surveillance also meant that any interior movement would be immediately visible to the hostage-takers. The open floor plan provided no cover for approaching rescue teams, and the multiple access points meant that coordinating a simultaneous assault would be extremely difficult. At 10:47 p.m., a development occurred that changed everything. Sarah observed through her scope what appeared to be one of the hostages standing up and moving toward the eastern windows. This was the first time since the initial crisis began that any hostage had moved from the central grouping.
More significantly, this individual appeared to be moving voluntarily rather than being directed by the perpetrators. The figure at the window began making what appeared to be deliberate gestures, raising and lowering arms in patterns that suggested an attempt at communication. Sarah immediately reported this to the command post, where intelligence analysts began to work to decode any potential message. The possibility that someone inside was attempting to communicate with outside forces provided a potential source of real-time intelligence about conditions within the conference hall. The signals continued for approximately 3 minutes before the figure was apparently directed back to the central group of hostages. But in those crucial minutes, Sarah had observed enough to provide tactical teams with valuable information about the interior layout and the positioning of both hostages and perpetrators. Based on these observations, Sarah reported that she had identified at least 4 distinct positions where armed individuals were stationed around the conference hall's perimeter. More importantly, she had gotten a clearer sense of the sightlines and potential angles of attack that might be available to rescue teams. This intelligence would prove crucial in the final phase of the crisis. The psychological pressure on everyone involved was reaching a critical point. Families of the hostages had been maintaining their vigil at the nearby hotel, many of them having gone without sleep since the crisis began. The emotional weight of their presence was felt by every law enforcement officer at the scene, adding personal stakes to what was already an enormously complex professional challenge. As 11 p.m. arrived, bringing the deadline within 1 hour, final preparations began for what appeared to be inevitable action. The FBI's hostage rescue team had positioned their entry teams at multiple points around the building. SWAT snipers had taken positions that would provide supporting fire if needed. Medical teams were standing by with multiple ambulances and a mobile trauma unit. Sarah received word through her earpiece that she was being designated as one of the primary snipers for any tactical operation. Her hours of observation and detailed knowledge of the interior layout made her an essential part of any rescue attempt. The responsibility was enormous. Her accuracy and timing could determine the difference between a successful rescue and a massacre for the innocent people trapped inside. The radio crackled with the final countdown. "All units, prepare for execute on my mark. Operation commences in 60 seconds. Sarah placed her finger on the trigger and began her final preparations. Somewhere below, 156 people were waiting for rescue, and 4 minutes and 18 seconds later, she would take the shot that would change everything.
The final seconds before midnight ticked away with mechanical precision as Sarah Chen steadied her breathing behind the sniper rifle. Through her scope, the conference hall appeared frozen in time, a tableau of terror that had persisted for over 14 hours. But beneath this apparent stillness, she could detect the subtle movements and positioning that would determine the success or failure of the rescue operation about to unfold. "All units, this is command. Execute, execute, execute." The words crackled through her earpiece at exactly 11:54 p.m., 6 minutes before the hostage-taker's deadline. In that instant, the Meridian Tower transformed from a monument to human desperation into a complex battlefield where every second would count and every decision would carry life or death consequences. The assault began with controlled explosions that shattered the building's silence. Breaching charges at 3 separate entry points created simultaneous access routes for the FBI's hostage rescue team. Flashbang grenades followed milliseconds later, their brilliant light and deafening sound designed to disorient the perpetrators and create precious seconds of confusion that the rescue teams could exploit. From her elevated position, Sarah watched the operation unfold through her scope with the detached precision of a professional. The first entry team emerged through the eastern stairwell exactly as planned, their tactical formation moving with practiced efficiency toward the conference hall. The second team breached through the service corridor, approaching from the western side. The third team, held in reserve, prepared to respond to whatever unexpected challenges might arise. The perpetrators' reaction was swift and coordinated, confirming the intelligence assessments that had identified them as highly trained and disciplined individuals. Rather than panicking in the face of the assault, they immediately moved to predetermined positions and began returning fire with military precision. The conference hall erupted in chaos as muzzle flashes illuminated the darkness and the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the glass walls.
Sarah's first target presented itself 37 seconds into the assault. Through her scope, she identified the figure she had been observing throughout the day, the individual who conducted regular perimeter checks and appeared to be directing the other perpetrators' movements. He had taken position behind a concrete pillar near the eastern wall, using a group of hostages as human shields while firing at the approaching rescue team. The shot required absolute precision. The target was partially obscured, moving intermittently, and positioned dangerously close to innocent civilians. Sarah controlled her breathing, calculated the variables of distance and angle, and waited for the perfect moment when the target would be clearly separated from any hostages. That moment came exactly 41 seconds after the assault began. The rifle's recoil was familiar and reassuring, and through her scope, she watched the impact of her shot. The perpetrator dropped immediately, his weapon clattering across the floor as he fell. One threat eliminated, but 3 or possibly more remained active within the conference hall. The rescue teams continued their advance, but the remaining hostage takers had adapted quickly to the assault and were fighting back with determined resistance. The second phase of the operation proved more challenging than anticipated. The remaining perpetrators had positioned themselves at strategic choke points that forced the rescue teams to approach across open ground where they would be exposed to defensive fire. The hostages, terrified and disoriented by the sudden violence surrounding them, were having difficulty following the shouted instructions to remain low and move toward the designated safe zones. Sarah's spotter, Detective Williams, provided continuous updates on the tactical situation developing below. 2 Tango's still active on the western side. Rescue Team Alpha is pinned down behind the stage. Rescue Team Bravo is advancing from the south, but they're taking heavy fire. The radio chatter filled Sarah's earpiece with urgent communications between team leaders, medical personnel, and command staff coordinating the complex operation. The psychological impact of the rescue operation on the hostages was immediately apparent in the hostages' behavior during the rescue operation. Many appeared to be in shock, moving slowly and requiring physical guidance from rescue team members. Others were more responsive but clearly traumatized by their ordeal. Medical personnel standing by outside the building prepared to treat both physical injuries and psychological trauma. As the 4th minute of the assault began, Sarah continued her overwatch responsibilities while scanning for any remaining threats. The conference hall was gradually emptying as rescue teams successfully evacuated groups of hostages, but the operation remained dangerous until every perpetrator was accounted for and every innocent person was safely outside the building. The radio chatter indicated that the rescue teams had made contact with several hostages who had observed the perpetrators' movements throughout the day. This intelligence was proving valuable in identifying potential hiding places and escape routes that the remaining suspects might attempt to use.
The 4th minute of the rescue operation brought both progress and new complications as the tactical situation within the conference hall continued to evolve. Sarah Chen maintained her overwatch position, scanning methodically through her scope for any signs of the remaining perpetrator while tracking the movement of rescue teams and evacuating hostages. The elimination of 3 threats had shifted the balance significantly, but experience had taught her that the final moments of such operations could be the most dangerous. Through her scope, Sarah could see that approximately half of the hostages had been successfully evacuated from the conference hall. Rescue Team Alpha had established a secure corridor to the eastern exit, and medical personnel were already beginning triage operations for the freed civilians. Many appeared to be suffering from dehydration, exhaustion, and psychological trauma, but initial reports suggested no serious physical injuries among the rescued hostages. The search for the 4th confirmed perpetrator intensified as rescue teams methodically cleared the conference hall's remaining hiding places. The individual had not been seen since the assault began, leading to speculation that he might have been eliminated in the initial confusion or had found a concealed position that provided exceptional cover. Either possibility presented challenges for the tactical teams responsible for securing the area. Detective Williams, Sarah's spotter, provided continuous updates on the developing situation. Quote, "Rescue teams are reporting possible movement in the northeastern corner," he noted. "Thermal imaging is inconclusive due to interference from the building's heating system, but there may be someone concealed behind the registration tables." The northeastern corner of the conference hall had been set up as a registration area for the Educational Technology Summit, with multiple tables, displays, and equipment that could provide cover for someone attempting to avoid detection. The area also offered potential access to service corridors that could allow an escape attempt or repositioning for a final desperate attack. Sarah adjusted her scope to focus on the northeastern section, studying the shadows and angles created by the registration setup. Movement in such a cluttered environment would be difficult to distinguish from the natural play of light and shadow created by the rescue team's tactical lighting. She would need to rely on her training and experience to identify any genuine threats among the visual confusion. At the 5-minute mark of the assault, a development occurred that validated the tactical team's concerns about the northeastern corner. A burst of automatic weapons fire erupted from the registration area, targeting Rescue Team Bravo as they attempted to evacuate the final group of hostages. The fourth perpetrator had indeed found concealment in that location and was making a final, desperate stand. The positioning was particularly dangerous because the remaining hostages were directly between the concealed perpetrator and the rescue teams attempting to reach them. Any return fire risked hitting innocent civilians, forcing the tactical teams to exercise extreme caution in their response. This standoff threatened to prolong the operation and increase the risk to everyone involved. Sarah immediately focused her scope on the registration area, searching for any sign of the shooter's exact position. The automatic weapons fire had revealed his general location, but she needed to identify his precise hiding spot before she could engage safely. The hostages in that section were lying prone on the floor as directed by the rescue teams, but they remained exposed and vulnerable. The fourth perpetrator demonstrated the same tactical discipline as his companions, firing in controlled bursts and then immediately repositioning to avoid return fire. This movement pattern made it extremely difficult for the rescue teams to pin down his location, and the presence of hostages prevented them from using more aggressive suppression techniques. Sarah's patience and observational skills proved crucial in this final phase. Through careful study of the muzzle flashes and the reflection off various surfaces, she began to triangulate the shooter's most likely position. He appeared to be using a large display table as primary cover, moving between 2 or 3 concealed positions behind registration equipment. The psychological pressure on the rescue teams was enormous. They had successfully evacuated most of the hostages and eliminated 3/4 of the threats, but this final perpetrator's position allowed him to potentially inflict significant casualties on both the remaining hostages and the rescue personnel. The operation's success would ultimately depend on neutralizing this last threat without further loss of life. At 6 minutes and 32 seconds into the assault, Sarah identified her target. The fourth perpetrator exposed himself for approximately 2 seconds while repositioning between concealed locations, providing her with the clear shot she had been waiting for. The angle was challenging, requiring her to fire through a gap in the registration equipment, but her calculations indicated a high probability of success. The shot was Sarah's most difficult of the night. The target was partially obscured, moving between cover positions, and located in an area cluttered with equipment that could deflect or fragment her round. She had to account for multiple variables while ensuring that her bullet would not continue through the target and potentially strike any of the hostages lying on the floor beyond. Sarah's fourth and final shot of the rescue operation came at exactly 6 minutes and 34 seconds after the assault began. The precision required was extraordinary, threading the bullet through gaps in the registration equipment to strike a moving target while ensuring no risk to innocent civilians. The shot struck the perpetrator in the upper chest, immediately ending his ability to continue fighting and eliminating the final confirmed threat. The immediate aftermath of the final shot brought a sudden change in the conference hall's atmosphere. The constant sound of gunfire ceased, replaced by the urgent but controlled voices of rescue team members coordinating the evacuation of the remaining hostages. Medical personnel were cleared to enter the secure areas and begin treating anyone who might have been injured during the extended crisis. Rescue Team Alpha reported all clear at 6 minutes and 58 seconds after the assault began, indicating that they had confirmed the elimination of all hostile threats and had secured the conference hall. The remaining hostages were quickly evacuated to safety, ending their 14-hour ordeal and allowing medical teams to begin comprehensive assessment and treatment. Sarah maintained her overwatch position for an additional 10 minutes as required by tactical protocols, ensuring that no additional threats emerged and that all rescue personnel could safely complete their operations. The building would require extensive clearing and investigation, but the immediate crisis was over, and all hostages were accounted for and safe. The statistical success of the operation was remarkable given the complexity and duration of the crisis. 156 hostages had been taken, and 156 hostages had been successfully rescued without a single civilian fatality. 4 perpetrators had been eliminated during the rescue operation, with no casualties among law enforcement or medical personnel. The aftermath brought both relief and recognition of the enormity of what had occurred. Sarah's 4 precision shots had played a crucial role in the successful resolution of the crisis, demonstrating the importance of skilled marksmanship in complex tactical operations. Her ability to maintain focus and accuracy throughout the extended operation had directly contributed to saving dozens of lives. The conference hall itself bore the scars of the intense firefight that had ended the crisis. Bullet holes marked walls and equipment, overturned tables and scattered materials testified to the violence that had erupted, and broken glass from the tactical entry operations glittered on the floor. But beneath the physical damage was the profound relief that came with the knowledge that no innocent lives had been lost. As Sarah finally stepped back from her rifle after nearly 15 hours in position, the weight of the operation began to settle on her shoulders. The technical aspects of her shooting had been executed flawlessly, but the human cost of the crisis, the trauma inflicted on the hostages, their families, and everyone involved in the response, would take much longer to fully comprehend.
The investigation that would follow would reveal the perpetrators' motivations, planning, and connections. Initial evidence suggested they were part of an international criminal organization with sophisticated operational capabilities. Their target appeared to have been the Educational Technology Summit itself, possibly related to valuable intellectual property or research being presented at the conference. The hostages were transported to multiple hospitals for medical evaluation and psychological support. While physical injuries were relatively minor, mostly related to dehydration and stress, the psychological impact of 14 hours in captivity would require extensive counseling and support services. Many would struggle with the trauma for months or years to come.
The immediate aftermath of the rescue operation transformed the Meridian Tower from a scene of terror into a complex crime scene, requiring methodical investigation and documentation. Sarah Chen finally stepped away from her sniper position as the sun began to rise over the city, painting the glass facade of the building in shades of gold and orange that seemed almost surreal after the darkness of the night's events. The debriefing process began immediately, as is standard protocol following any major tactical operation. Sarah was escorted to the Mobile Command Unit, where federal agents and departmental supervisors were already conducting preliminary interviews with all personnel involved in the rescue attempt. The precise timeline of events, decision-making processes, and tactical execution would all be thoroughly analyzed to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. Special Agent Martinez, the FBI's lead negotiator, was among the first to interview Sarah about her observations and actions during the crisis. "Your shots were instrumental in the success of this operation," Martinez stated, reviewing the preliminary tactical assessment. "The precision you demonstrated under these conditions likely prevented significant casualties among both hostages and rescue personnel." The conference hall was now a carefully controlled crime scene, with forensic specialists documenting every aspect of the perpetrator's planning and execution. Initial findings suggested an extraordinary level of preparation, including detailed building plans, security system schematics, and what appeared to be inside information about the Educational Technology Summit's schedule and attendance.
Medical teams had completed their initial assessment of all 156 rescued hostages. Remarkably, no one had suffered serious physical injuries during their captivity or the rescue operation. However, psychological evaluations revealed varying degrees of trauma that would require ongoing support and counseling. Many hostages were experiencing symptoms of acute stress reaction, including anxiety, disorientation, and difficulty processing the events they had endured. Dr. Elizabeth Hartlin, the criminal psychologist who had provided behavioral analysis throughout the crisis, was conducting detailed interviews with several hostages who had observed the perpetrator's behavior during the captivity. These accounts were providing valuable insights into the criminal's motivations, communication patterns, and possible connections to larger criminal organizations. The level of discipline they maintained throughout the 14-hour standoff was remarkable, Dr. Hartman explained to the debriefing team. They showed no signs of panic or irrationality, even when faced with the tactical assault. This suggests extensive training and possibly military or law enforcement backgrounds. The investigation was revealing disturbing details about the scope of the perpetrator's planning. Evidence found in their vehicles and a nearby safe house indicated that the Educational Technology Summit had been under surveillance for several weeks prior to the attack. The criminals had detailed information about building security, staff schedules, and even the personal backgrounds of likely attendees. Sarah's role in the successful resolution was being recognized at the highest levels of law enforcement. Her 4 precision shots had eliminated critical threats while maintaining absolute safety for the hostages, demonstrating marksmanship skills that had been essential to the operation's success. The shots would later be analyzed by ballistics experts and tactical specialists as textbook examples of precision shooting under extreme pressure. The perpetrators' identities were gradually being established through fingerprint analysis and international database searches. Preliminary results suggested they were members of a Romanian criminal organization with connections to similar operations across Europe. Their entry into the United States and acquisition of weapons and equipment indicated a sophisticated support network that would require extensive investigation. The psychological impact on law enforcement personnel involved in the operation was also receiving attention. Crisis situations of this magnitude affect everyone involved, from the tactical teams who conducted the assault to the support personnel who maintained communications and logistics throughout the 14-hour standoff. Counseling and support services were being made available to all personnel. Sarah's supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, who oversaw the department's specialized units, conducted a detailed review of her performance during the crisis. "Your actions last night represent the highest standards of professional excellence," Hayes told Sarah during their private meeting. "The precision you demonstrated under extreme conditions likely saved dozens of lives." The investigation was expanding to include examination of security failures that had allowed the perpetrators to gain access to the building and implement their plan. The Meridian Tower's security systems had been sophisticated by normal standards, but the criminals had apparently possessed detailed knowledge of vulnerabilities and workarounds that had enabled their successful infiltration. The Educational Technology Summit itself was being reviewed to understand why it had been targeted by international criminals. Several presentations had dealt with cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and educational data systems that could have significant commercial value if stolen or held for ransom. As the morning progressed, Sarah began the process of returning to normal duties while remaining available for ongoing investigation requirements. The intensity of the previous night's events would take time to fully process, but her training and experience helped her maintain the professional perspective necessary to function effectively in the aftermath of such a crisis. The weapon she had used during the operation would be retained as evidence pending the completion of ballistics analysis and legal proceedings. Each of her 4 shots would be meticulously documented and analyzed to ensure that all procedures had been followed correctly and that the use of deadly force had been justified under the circumstances.
The city was slowly returning to normal as news of the successful rescue spread through media outlets and social networks. The Meridian Tower remained closed pending completion of the forensic investigation, but surrounding businesses and institutions were reopening as the immediate security threat had been eliminated. The success of the operation would have lasting implications for tactical training and crisis response protocols. The coordination between multiple agencies, the precision of the tactical assault, and the successful resolution without civilian casualties would become a model for handling similar situations in the future. Sarah's role as a precision marksman had been crucial to the success, demonstrating the vital importance of highly skilled snipers in complex hostage rescue operations.
3 weeks after the Meridian Tower crisis, Sarah Chen found herself in an unfamiliar position, testifying before a congressional subcommittee investigating domestic security vulnerabilities and international criminal infiltration. The rescue operation had been deemed so significant that it warranted federal-level review, and Sarah's precision shooting had become a focal point of discussions about law enforcement training and tactical capabilities. The hearing room was packed with representatives, staff members, and media personnel, all seeking to understand how 4 international criminals had managed to orchestrate such a sophisticated operation on American soil. Sarah sat at the witness table, wearing her dress uniform and speaking into a microphone that carried her words to millions of viewers watching the live broadcast. "Detective Chen," began Congressman Michael Harrison, the subcommittee chairman, "your actions during the Meridian Tower crisis have been described by experts as exemplary. Can you walk us through your decision-making process during those critical moments when you engaged the perpetrators?" Sarah's response was measured and professional, focusing on the technical aspects of her training and the tactical considerations that had guided her actions. She explained how years of preparation had enabled her to maintain accuracy under extreme pressure, and how the coordination with rescue teams had been essential to the operation's success. The investigation into the perpetrators' backgrounds had revealed disturbing connections to a broader criminal network operating across multiple countries. Interpol had identified links to similar operations in Romania, Bulgaria, and several Western European nations. The Meridian Tower attack appeared to have been a test of tactics and capabilities that could potentially be used in future operations. Dr. Elena Volkov, a specialist in international criminal organizations, had been brought in to brief the congressional subcommittee on the broader implications of the case. What we witnessed in the Meridian Tower was not an isolated incident. It represents a new level of sophistication in criminal operations that poses significant challenges to traditional law enforcement approaches. The perpetrators had been identified as members of a group known as the Carpathian Syndicate, a criminal organization that specialized in high-value kidnapping, extortion, and technology theft. Their operations had been linked to attacks on corporate facilities, government installations, and research institutions across Eastern and Western Europe over the past 5 years. Sarah's testimony revealed details about the tactical challenges that had made the rescue operation so complex. The perpetrators' use of human shields, their strategic positioning within the conference hall, and their sophisticated understanding of law enforcement tactics had created a situation requiring extraordinary precision and coordination to resolve successfully. The psychological profiles developed during the crisis had proven remarkably accurate. The perpetrators had indeed been former military personnel with specialized training in urban combat and hostage operations. Their discipline under pressure and tactical sophistication had been consistent with special forces or elite military unit backgrounds. The Educational Technology Summit had been specifically targeted because of presentations on advanced cybersecurity systems and artificial intelligence applications in educational data management. The criminals had apparently intended to steal valuable intellectual property and hold the researchers for ransom, demanding both money and proprietary information from their employers. Sarah's 4 shots during the rescue operation had been analyzed by ballistics experts from the FBI, military special operations commands, and international law enforcement agencies.
The precision demonstrated under such challenging conditions had been described as exceptional by every expert who reviewed the case. The shots taken by Detective Chen required not only extraordinary marksmanship skills, but also exceptional judgment and situational awareness. Each shot was fired in a dynamic environment with multiple variables affecting accuracy, and each was executed with precision that protected innocent lives while eliminating confirmed threats. The congressional investigation was also examining security failures that had enabled the perpetrators to conduct surveillance and planning operations without detection. The Carpathian Syndicate had apparently spent months gathering intelligence about the Meridian Tower, its security systems, and the Educational Technology Summit's schedule and participants. Video surveillance from various locations around the city captured members of the criminal group conducting reconnaissance operations over a 6-week period prior to the attack. They had systematically studied building access points, security patrol patterns, and emergency response procedures with a level of detail that suggested professional intelligence gathering capabilities. The weapons used in the attack had been traced to a sophisticated smuggling network that moved military-grade firearms across international borders. The perpetrators had possessed automatic rifles, tactical equipment, and communications gear that exceeded the capabilities of most criminal organizations, suggesting significant financial backing and logistical support. Sarah's testimony also addressed the psychological toll of the extended crisis on all personnel involved. The 14-hour standoff had tested the limits of human endurance and professional training, requiring sustained focus and decision-making under extreme pressure. She emphasized the importance of comprehensive preparation and ongoing training in developing the capabilities necessary to handle such situations. The hostages who had been rescued were making varying degrees of recovery from their trauma. Some had returned to work and normal activities within days of the incident, while others continued to struggle with anxiety, sleep disorders, and difficulty concentrating. Comprehensive psychological support services had been provided to all survivors and their families. Congressional representatives expressed particular interest in the international coordination that had been required to identify the perpetrators and understand their connections to broader criminal networks. The case had demonstrated both the effectiveness of international law enforcement cooperation and the need for enhanced information sharing to prevent similar attacks. The investigation had revealed that the Carpathian Syndicate had been planning similar operations against research facilities and corporate installations in other major American cities. Intelligence gathered from their safe houses and communication intercepts suggested that the Meridian Tower attack was intended as a proof of concept for a broader campaign of technology theft and extortion. Sarah's personal experience during the crisis had become a case study in crisis leadership and tactical decision-making. Her ability to maintain focus and accuracy throughout the extended operation had been analyzed by tactical training specialists seeking to understand the psychological factors that enable exceptional performance under extreme stress. The equipment she had used during the operation, her sniper rifle, scope, and communications gear, had been thoroughly examined to understand the technical capabilities that had enabled her success. The analysis had led to recommendations for equipment upgrades and training enhancements for law enforcement sniper teams across the country. The broader implications of the Meridian Tower crisis extended beyond law enforcement into corporate security, building design, and emergency preparedness planning. The perpetrator's ability to take control of a modern, supposedly secure facility had highlighted vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed in similar buildings across the country. The congressional hearing concluded with a recognition of Sarah's exceptional service and recommendations for enhanced training and equipment for law enforcement tactical units. Her 4 precision shots had not only saved lives, but had also provided valuable lessons about the capabilities required to address increasingly sophisticated criminal threats. As Sarah concluded her testimony, she reflected on the weight of responsibility that came with her specialized skills. The success of the Meridian Tower operation had demonstrated the critical importance of highly trained professionals in protecting public safety, but it had also highlighted the evolving nature of the threats that law enforcement agencies would face in the future.
6 months after the Meridian Tower crisis, the ripple effects of that 14-hour ordeal continued to reshape law enforcement training, international security cooperation, and the lives of everyone who had been involved. Sarah Chen had been promoted to sergeant and assigned to lead a new specialized unit focused on counterterrorism and high-risk tactical operations, a direct result of the expertise and leadership she had demonstrated during the crisis. The new unit, officially designated the Metropolitan Police Department's Critical Incident Response Team, represented a significant investment in capabilities designed to address the kind of sophisticated threats exemplified by the Carpathian Syndicate. Sarah found herself responsible for training other officers in precision marksmanship, tactical decision-making, and the psychological preparation necessary to perform under extreme pressure. The training facility where Sarah now worked had been significantly upgraded with federal funding allocated specifically for counterterrorism preparedness. Advanced simulation systems allowed officers to practice complex scenarios similar to the Meridian Tower situation, using virtual reality technology to create realistic training environments that would have been impossible to replicate safely in traditional facilities. Detective Williams, who had served as Sarah's spotter during the crisis, had also been promoted and assigned to the new unit. Their partnership during those critical hours had demonstrated the importance of team coordination in tactical operations, and their experience was now being used to develop new protocols for sniper team operations. The investigation into the Carpathian Syndicate had expanded into a multinational effort involving law enforcement agencies from 12 countries. The network's operations had been more extensive than initially realized, with connections to criminal activities spanning from Eastern Europe to North America. The Meridian Tower attack had been part of a broader strategy to establish operational capabilities in the United States. International arrests had been made in Romania, Bulgaria, and Germany, targeting individuals identified as key figures in the syndicate's leadership structure. The intelligence gathered from the Meridian Tower operation had been crucial in mapping the organization's personnel, financial networks, and operational methods. Sarah's precise elimination of the 4 perpetrators had prevented the destruction of valuable evidence that might otherwise have been lost. The hostages from the Educational Technology Summit had formed a survivors support group that met regularly to help each other process their shared trauma and advocate for improved security measures at public events. Many had become vocal supporters of enhanced law enforcement training and funding, citing Sarah's actions as examples of the critical importance of specialized tactical capabilities. Dr. Patricia Morrison, one of the rescued hostages who had been presenting research on educational cybersecurity, had established a scholarship fund in honor of the law enforcement officers who had participated in the rescue operation. Detective Chen's precision and professionalism saved my life and the lives of everyone in that room, she stated during the fund's launch event. We owe it to future generations to ensure that our protectors have the training and resources they need. The Meridian Tower itself had undergone extensive security upgrades following the crisis. The building's ownership had invested millions of dollars in enhanced surveillance systems, access controls, and emergency communication capabilities designed to prevent similar infiltrations and provide better intelligence to law enforcement in case of future incidents. The Educational Technology Summit had resumed the following year with significantly enhanced security measures and a memorial segment honoring the resilience of the previous year's attendees. Sarah had been invited as a guest speaker, though she had declined the invitation, preferring to focus on her training responsibilities rather than public recognition. The tactical analysis of the rescue operation had been published as a case study by the FBI's Training Academy and was being used in law enforcement programs across the country and internationally. Sarah's 4 shots had been broken down frame by frame with detailed analysis of the environmental factors, target identification challenges, and split-second decision-making that had made the operation successful. The psychological impact studies conducted on all personnel involved in the crisis had led to new protocols for stress management and mental health support in tactical operations. The research had shown that even highly trained professionals could benefit from enhanced preparation for the emotional and psychological challenges of life or death situations. Sarah's marksmanship skills had become legendary within law enforcement circles, but she remained focused on the practical aspects of training and preparation rather than the recognition.
Her training sessions with new recruits emphasized the fundamentals of accuracy, judgment, and teamwork that had been essential to the Meridian Tower's success. The weapons technology used during the operation had also evolved based on lessons learned from the crisis. Sarah now trained with advanced rifle systems that incorporated improved optics, ballistic computers, and communication integration designed to enhance accuracy and coordination in complex tactical situations. The intelligence community had developed new threat assessment protocols based on the Carpathian Syndicate's operational methods. The group's ability to conduct extensive surveillance and planning without detection highlighted gaps in traditional security monitoring that were now being addressed through enhanced information sharing and analysis capabilities. The Congressional Subcommittee's recommendations had resulted in significant funding increases for tactical training and equipment across federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. The Meridian Tower crisis had demonstrated both the effectiveness of proper preparation and the consequences of sophisticated criminal threats that exceeded traditional response capabilities. Sarah's new responsibilities included developing training partnerships with international law enforcement agencies, sharing the tactical lessons learned from the Meridian Tower operation with police and military units in allied countries. Her expertise was being used to enhance global capabilities for addressing similar threats. The personal cost of the crisis continued to affect everyone who had been involved. While Sarah had successfully processed much of the psychological impact through counseling and peer support, she remained acutely aware of the weight of responsibility that came with her specialized role. The knowledge that her actions had directly determined whether 156 people lived or died was something that would stay with her throughout her career. The criminal justice proceedings related to the Carpathian Syndicate continued to unfold through international courts. The evidence gathered from the Meridian Tower operation was being used to prosecute network members in multiple countries, with the goal of dismantling the entire organization and preventing future operations. The technological theft that the syndicate's apparent objective had been was part of a broader pattern of industrial espionage and intellectual property theft that had become a significant national security concern. The Educational Technology Summit attack had highlighted vulnerabilities in protecting valuable research and development activities from sophisticated criminal targeting. Sarah's training programs were attracting interest from military special operations units who recognized the applicability of her precision shooting techniques and decision-making protocols to their own operational requirements. The civilian law enforcement perspective on tactical operations was providing valuable insights for military training and doctrine development. The success of the Meridian Tower rescue had become a symbol of effective law enforcement response to evolving criminal threats. Sarah's 4 shots had not only saved lives, but had also demonstrated the importance of investing in specialized capabilities and comprehensive training for the challenges that law enforcement would continue to face in an increasingly complex security environment.
1 year after the Meridian Tower crisis, Sarah Chen stood before the National Law Enforcement Training Center's annual conference, addressing an audience of over 800 police officers, federal agents, and military personnel from around the world. Her presentation, titled Precision Under Pressure, Tactical Decision-Making in Critical Incidents, had become one of the most requested training programs in law enforcement education. The conference hall was filled with professionals who had studied every aspect of the Meridian Tower operation, analyzing Sarah's 4 shots frame by frame and examining the tactical decisions that had led to the successful rescue of all 156 hostages. Her insights into the psychological and technical challenges of precision shooting under extreme pressure had become essential learning for tactical teams worldwide. The most important lesson from the Meridian Tower operation, Sarah began her presentation, was not about marksmanship or tactics, but about preparation. The 14 hours of that crisis were a test of everything we had learned and trained for throughout our careers. Success came not from heroic actions in the moment, but from years of dedicated preparation for situations we hoped would never occur. The audience listened intently as Sarah walked through the timeline of the crisis, explaining the environmental factors, tactical considerations, and split-second decisions that had shaped each of her 4 shots. She emphasized the importance of team coordination, communication, and the psychological preparation necessary to maintain accuracy when innocent lives depended on precision. The Carpathian Syndicate investigation had reached its conclusion with successful prosecutions in 7 countries and the dismantling of a criminal network that had been responsible for dozens of attacks across Europe and North America. The intelligence gathered from the Meridian Tower operation had been instrumental in identifying and locating the organization's leadership, financial networks, and operational infrastructure. Interpol had credited the Meridian Tower rescue with preventing an estimated 12 additional attacks that the syndicate had been planning against research facilities, corporate headquarters, and government installations. The precision with which Sarah had eliminated the 4 perpetrators had preserved crucial evidence and intelligence that might otherwise have been destroyed in a prolonged firefight. The hostages from the Educational Technology Summit had achieved varying degrees of recovery from their trauma, with most returning to normal lives and careers. However, the experience had profoundly changed many of them, leading to career shifts, advocacy work, and ongoing involvement in security and emergency preparedness initiatives. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who had been presenting cybersecurity research when the attack began, had become a leading advocate for enhanced security measures at academic and research conferences. She had worked with Sarah to develop security protocols that balanced academic openness with protection against sophisticated threats. Detective Chen's actions that day saved not just our lives, but our futures, Dr. Morrison had testified before a university security conference. The research we were presenting could have been lost forever, along with years of work that will benefit millions of students. Her precision under pressure protected not just people, but knowledge itself. The Metropolitan Police Department's critical incident response team that Sarah now led had become a model for tactical units across the country. The training protocols she had developed, based on lessons learned from the Meridian Tower crisis, were being implemented by law enforcement agencies from coast to coast. The psychological research conducted on the crisis had led to breakthrough understanding of performance under extreme stress. Sarah's ability to maintain accuracy throughout the extended operation had become a case study in stress management, cognitive load management, and the psychological factors that enable exceptional performance when lives are at stake. The weapons and equipment innovations that had resulted from analysis of the operation were now standard issue for tactical teams in major metropolitan areas. The precision rifle systems, advanced optics, and communication equipment that had enabled Sarah's success were being manufactured and deployed based on specifications developed from her experience. International cooperation in law enforcement had been significantly enhanced by the lessons learned from the Carpathian Syndicate investigation. The multinational coordination required to dismantle the criminal network had demonstrated both the necessity and the effectiveness of enhanced information sharing and operational cooperation between allied law enforcement agencies. Sarah's training responsibilities had expanded beyond marksmanship to include crisis leadership, tactical decision-making, and the psychological preparation necessary for high-stakes operations. Her programs were training the next generation of tactical officers who might face similar challenges to those presented by the Meridian Tower crisis. The building security standards that had been developed following the crisis were being implemented in major facilities across the country. The architectural and technological vulnerabilities that the Carpathian Syndicate had exploited were being addressed through comprehensive security upgrades and enhanced emergency response capabilities. The memorial garden that had been established at the Meridian Tower honored both the resilience of the hostages and the professionalism of the law enforcement personnel who had participated in the rescue operation. Sarah visited the garden regularly, using the quiet space to reflect on the weight of responsibility that came with her specialized role. The media attention that had followed the crisis had gradually shifted from sensational coverage to serious analysis of the security challenges facing modern society. Sarah's story had become a symbol of professional excellence and dedication, but she remained focused on the practical work of training and preparation rather than public recognition. The research into tactical shooting that had been inspired by Sarah's performance was advancing the science of precision marksmanship under stress. Her shooting techniques were being studied by sports scientists, military researchers, and law enforcement trainers seeking to understand the factors that enable exceptional accuracy under extreme pressure.
The criminal justice reforms that had resulted from the Carpathian Syndicate case were enhancing international cooperation in prosecuting transnational criminal organizations. The evidence preservation and intelligence gathering techniques used during the Meridian Tower operation were being incorporated into standard protocols for similar situations. The technology sector had also responded to the lessons learned from the crisis, with enhanced security measures for research conferences and corporate events that handle sensitive intellectual property. The Educational Technology Summit had become a model for balancing academic openness with protection against sophisticated threats. Sarah's influence extended beyond law enforcement into military and security consulting, as her expertise was sought by organizations facing similar challenges to those posed by sophisticated criminal and terrorist threats. Her analytical approach to tactical problems was being applied to security planning for major events, facilities, and operations worldwide. The personal impact of the crisis continued to shape Sarah's perspective on her profession and responsibilities. The knowledge that her actions had directly saved 156 lives remains a source of both pride and humility, driving her continued commitment to excellence in training and preparation. The Meridian Tower operation had become a defining moment, not just for Sarah's career, but for the evolution of tactical law enforcement in response to increasingly sophisticated threats. Her 4 shots had not only ended a crisis, but had also contributed to enhanced capabilities that would protect countless others in the future.
5 years after the Meridian Tower crisis, Sarah Chen had become one of the most respected tactical training instructors in law enforcement. But the true measure of her legacy was not found in awards or recognition. It was found in the lives that continued to be saved by officers trained in the techniques and principles she had developed from her experience during those critical 14 hours. The critical incident response team that Sarah led had responded to 17 major tactical situations since the Meridian Tower operation, successfully resolving each without loss of civilian life. The training protocols, decision-making frameworks, and tactical innovations that had emerged from her experience were being credited with transforming law enforcement's ability to handle complex crisis situations. Detective Jennifer Rodriguez, one of Sarah's most promising students, had recently applied the precision shooting techniques learned in Sarah's program to successfully resolve a hostage situation at a downtown bank. The incident had lasted only 47 minutes, and Rodriguez's single shot had ended the crisis without harm to any of the 12 hostages or law enforcement personnel involved. Sergeant Chen's training saved those 12 lives, Rodriguez explained during her debriefing. The techniques she developed from the Meridian Tower operation, the breathing control, the environmental analysis, the split-second decision-making, all of it came together in that moment when I needed it most. The international impact of Sarah's work had grown significantly over the years. Law enforcement agencies from 37 countries had sent personnel to train with her team, and the tactical protocols developed from the Meridian Tower experience were being implemented by police and military units worldwide. The precision shooting techniques that had enabled her 4 successful shots were now standard training in elite tactical programs globally. The Carpathian Syndicate's dismantling had led to a significant reduction in sophisticated criminal operations targeting research facilities and corporate installations. However, new threats had emerged that required continued evolution of tactical capabilities and training methods. Sarah's approach to threat analysis and tactical preparation was being applied to address emerging challenges from cybercriminals, domestic extremists, and state-sponsored actors. The psychological research that had been conducted on Sarah's performance during the crisis had contributed to breakthrough understanding of human performance under extreme stress. The cognitive techniques and mental preparation methods she had used were now being taught not only to law enforcement personnel, but also to military special operations units, emergency medical teams, and other professionals who must perform critical tasks under pressure. The Meridian Tower itself had become an unlikely symbol of resilience and professional excellence. The building had been renovated and reopened with state-of-the-art security systems, and a permanent exhibit in the lobby honored both the survivors of the crisis and the law enforcement personnel who had participated in the rescue operation. Sarah's 4 shots were commemorated not as acts of violence, but as examples of precision, judgment, and dedication to protecting innocent life. The Educational Technology Summit had continued to grow and evolve, becoming one of the premier conferences in its field while maintaining the enhanced security measures that had been developed following the crisis. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who had been a hostage, now served on the conference's Security Advisory Board and worked closely with Sarah's team to ensure the safety of attendees while preserving the open academic environment that made the event valuable. The technological innovations that had resulted from analysis of the Meridian Tower operation were continuing to advance law enforcement capabilities. The precision rifle systems, advanced optics, and communication equipment that had been refined based on Sarah's experience were now being integrated with artificial intelligence and machine learning systems to enhance accuracy and decision-making in tactical situations. Sarah's personal journey since the crisis had been one of continued growth and dedication to her profession. She had completed advanced degrees in criminal justice and psychology, focusing her research on tactical decision-making and performance under stress. Her academic work was contributing to the scientific understanding of the factors that enable exceptional performance in life-or-death situations. The memorial fund established by the hostage survivors had grown into a significant source of funding for law enforcement training and equipment. The scholarships and grants provided by the fund were ensuring that the lessons learned from the Meridian Tower crisis would continue to benefit law enforcement officers for generations to come. The political and policy changes that had resulted from the crisis were continuing to shape law enforcement and security practices at all levels of government. The federal funding increases for tactical training and equipment that had been recommended by the Congressional Subcommittee were producing measurable improvements in law enforcement capabilities across the country. The media coverage of the 5-year anniversary focused on the lasting impact of the crisis and the ongoing relevance of the lessons learned. Sarah participated in a documentary that examined how the 14-hour ordeal had changed law enforcement training, international security cooperation, and understanding of human performance under extreme pressure. The most important thing to understand about the Meridian Tower operation, Sarah explained in the documentary, is that success came from preparation, not heroism. The shots I took that night were the result of years of training, not moments of inspiration. The real heroes were the team members who maintained communication, the tactical officers who coordinated the assault, and the hostages who followed instructions and trusted us to bring them home safely. The ongoing threat assessment and security planning that had evolved from the Carpathian Syndicate investigation was helping law enforcement agencies stay ahead of emerging criminal threats. The intelligence analysis techniques and international cooperation protocols that had been developed were being applied to address new challenges from cybercriminals, domestic extremists, and state-sponsored actors. The personal relationships that had been forged during the crisis continued to influence Sarah's approach to leadership and training. Her partnership with Detective Williams, her interaction with the hostage survivors, and her collaboration with federal agents and international law enforcement personnel had demonstrated the importance of teamwork and communication in achieving success in complex operations. The scientific analysis of Sarah's 4 shots had contributed to advances in ballistics, optics, and precision shooting techniques that extended far beyond law enforcement applications. The research had implications for military marksmanship, competitive shooting, and even medical procedures that required similar levels of precision and steadiness under pressure. The ethical considerations that had shaped Sarah's decision-making during the crisis were now part of the curriculum in law enforcement training programs. The split-second judgments about when to shoot, how to minimize risk to innocent life, and how to balance multiple competing priorities were being studied and taught as essential skills for tactical officers. The legacy of the Meridian Tower crisis was not just about one successful operation or 4 precision shots. It was about the ongoing commitment to excellence, preparation, and protection of innocent life that Sarah and her colleagues brought to their work every day. The crisis had tested their capabilities and proven their dedication, but more importantly, it had provided lessons that would continue to save lives for years to come.
As Sarah looked toward the future of law enforcement and tactical operations, she remained focused on the fundamental principles that had guided her actions during those critical 14 hours: preparation, precision, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life. The challenges facing law enforcement would continue to evolve, but the principles that had enabled success at the Meridian Tower would remain relevant as long as officers were called upon to stand between innocent people and those who would do them harm.
10 years after that fateful night at the Meridian Tower, Sarah Chen stood at the podium of the International Law Enforcement Academy, delivering the keynote address to graduating cadets from 43 countries. Her silver hair and the lines around her eyes spoke of a decade filled with challenges, successes, and the weight of responsibility that came with being one of the world's most respected tactical training experts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of experience and the gravity of having lived through moments that tested the very limits of human capability. 10 years ago tonight, I fired 4 shots that changed not only my life, but the trajectory of tactical law enforcement around the world. Those 3.2 seconds of action were the culmination of everything I had learned, and the beginning of everything I would teach. The audience of young officers listened with rapt attention as Sarah recounted the technical details of that night: the environmental factors, the psychological pressure, the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between life and death for 156 innocent people. But more than the technical aspects, she emphasized the human elements that had made success possible: preparation, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The decade following the Meridian Tower crisis had seen unprecedented changes in law enforcement training and international security cooperation. Sarah's critical incident response team had evolved into a global consulting organization that worked with police, military, and security agencies worldwide to develop capabilities for addressing sophisticated threats. The techniques and protocols that had emerged from her experience were now standard training in tactical programs across 6 continents. The precision shooting methods, decision-making frameworks, and stress management techniques that had enabled her success were being taught to thousands of officers who might one day face similar challenges. Detective Williams, now Captain Williams and Sarah's deputy in the international training program, had become an expert in tactical team coordination and communication. His role as Sarah's spotter during the crisis had evolved into leadership of programs that trained tactical teams in the seamless coordination that had been essential to the Meridian Tower success. The most important lesson we learned that night, Williams often told his students, was that individual excellence means nothing without team coordination. Sergeant Chen's shots were precise because our entire team functioned as a single unit, each person contributing their expertise to enable success. The technological advances that had resulted from analysis of the Meridian Tower operation were continuing to transform tactical operations. The rifle systems, optics, and communication equipment that had been refined based on Sarah's experience were now incorporating artificial intelligence, advanced ballistic computers, and real-time environmental monitoring that enhanced accuracy beyond what had been imaginable 10 years earlier. The international criminal organizations that had emerged since the Carpathian Syndicate's dismantling were more sophisticated and better funded than their predecessors, but law enforcement capabilities had evolved to meet these challenges. The intelligence sharing, tactical coordination, and specialized training that had been developed from the Meridian Tower experience were enabling successful operations against threats that would have been insurmountable a decade earlier. Sarah's academic research had contributed to breakthrough understanding of human performance under extreme stress. Her doctoral dissertation on tactical decision-making had become required reading in psychology and law enforcement programs, and her ongoing research was advancing the science of training professionals who must perform critical tasks under life or death pressure. The Memorial Garden at the Meridian Tower had become a pilgrimage site for law enforcement officers from around the world. The simple granite marker that honored the professionalism of those who had participated in the rescue operation served as a reminder of the dedication and sacrifice required to protect innocent life in an increasingly dangerous world. Dr. Patricia Morrison, now in her 70s, continued to serve on security advisory boards and remained a close friend and advisor to Sarah. Her perspective, as someone who had experienced the terror of being held hostage, provided valuable insights into the human impact of tactical operations and the importance of considering the psychological needs of victims during and after crisis situations. Sarah's precision that night saved our lives, but her compassion and understanding in the years since have helped us heal, Dr. Morrison often said when speaking to survivor support groups. She understood that the rescue was just the beginning of our journey, and her continued support has been as important as her marksmanship. The educational technology research that had been the target of the original attack had eventually led to breakthrough innovations in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence that are now protecting millions of students and researchers worldwide. The intellectual property that the Carpathian Syndicate had sought to steal was now being used to develop security systems that prevented exactly the kind of attacks they had attempted. The policy changes that had resulted from the congressional investigation were continuing to shape law enforcement and security practices at all levels. The federal funding for tactical training and equipment that had been allocated following the crisis had produced measurable improvements in law enforcement capabilities and had prevented an estimated 37 major criminal operations from succeeding. Sarah's influence extended far beyond law enforcement into corporate security, emergency management, and even medical training. The principles of precision under pressure that she had demonstrated were being applied in operating rooms, disaster response operations, and any situation where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death. The personal cost of the decade following the crisis had been significant for everyone involved. Sarah had lost colleagues to other operations, had seen students face their own life-or-death situations, and had carried the weight of knowing that her training and guidance directly influenced whether others would live or die in critical moments. The psychological support systems that had been developed for tactical officers had evolved significantly based on understanding gained from studying the long-term effects of the Meridian Tower crisis on all personnel involved. The comprehensive mental health resources now available to law enforcement officers were helping prevent burnout and ensuring that those who faced extreme situations could continue to serve effectively throughout their careers. The international training programs that Sarah now directed were graduating officers who carried the lessons of the Meridian Tower operation back to their home countries, spreading the influence of that single night's events to law enforcement agencies around the world. The precision shooting techniques, tactical decision-making protocols, and stress management techniques were becoming part of the global standard for tactical operations. The weapons technology that had been inspired by analysis of Sarah's 4 shots was now being used by elite units worldwide. The precision rifle systems, optics, and communication equipment that had been developed based on Sarah's experience were enabling officers to operate with accuracy and coordination that exceeded what was possible during the original crisis. The criminal justice innovations that had emerged from the Carpathian Syndicate investigation were transforming international law enforcement cooperation. The evidence sharing, joint investigation techniques, and coordinated prosecution methods that had been developed were being used to combat transnational criminal organizations that pose threats to multiple countries. Sarah's legacy was not just about one successful operation or 4 precise shots. It was about the thousands of officers who had been trained in the techniques and principles that had made that success possible. Her influence was multiplying with each new class of graduates who carried her teachings into their own communities and operations. The economic impact of the enhanced security measures and training programs that had resulted from the Meridian Tower crisis was estimated in the billions of dollars of criminal activity prevented and lives saved. The investment in tactical capabilities and international cooperation were producing measurable returns in terms of public safety and security.
As Sarah concluded her address to the international graduating class, she reflected on the journey that had begun with 4 shots fired in 3.2 seconds and had evolved into a decade of service, teaching, and dedication to ensuring that others would be prepared for the challenges they might face. The shots I fired that night were not heroic. They were the inevitable result of preparation, training, and the support of teammates who made precision possible. Your success in protecting others will come not from individual heroism, but from the dedication to excellence that you demonstrate every day in your preparation and service.
15 years had passed since that dark Tuesday night when Sarah Chen peered through her scope at the Meridian Tower, and the world of law enforcement had been forever changed by the lessons learned from those critical 14 hours. Now serving as the director of the Global Tactical Training Initiative, Sarah had dedicated her life to ensuring that the precision, professionalism, and teamwork that had saved 156 lives that night would be available to law enforcement officers facing similar challenges anywhere in the world. The anniversary memorial service at the Meridian Tower drew hundreds of attendees each year. Former hostages, their families, law enforcement officers from around the world, and students of tactical operations who came to pay their respects to the professionalism and dedication that had turned a potential massacre into a story of human triumph. Sarah stood before the memorial wall, reading the names of the 156 people whose lives had been saved, and reflecting on the responsibility that had shaped every day of the decade and a half since then. Maria Gonzalez, who had been a 23-year-old graduate student attending her first professional conference when the crisis began, now served as the executive director of the Hostage Survivor Support Network. Her organization provided counseling, advocacy, and resources to victims of similar crises worldwide, and she credited Sarah's continued involvement in post-crisis support as essential to her own recovery and that of countless others. Sergeant Chen, now Director Chen, saved our lives that night with her precision and skill, Maria said during the memorial service. But she continued to save us in the days, months, and years that followed by helping us understand that survival was not the end of our story, but the beginning of our opportunity to help others. The 4 shots that Sarah had fired in those critical 3.2 seconds had been analyzed, studied, and replicated in training scenarios thousands of times. But their true significance lay not in their technical precision, but in the principles they represented: preparation, discipline, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life even in the face of extraordinary danger. Captain Williams, now Director Williams, and Sarah's co-leader of the global initiative, had become one of the world's leading experts in tactical team coordination. His experience as Sarah's spotter during the crisis had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of how individual excellence could be multiplied through effective teamwork and communication. The training facilities that had been built around the world using protocols developed from the Meridian Tower experience were graduating officers who carried those lessons into their daily service. The precision shooting techniques, stress management methods, and decision-making frameworks that had enabled success that night were now protecting communities on every continent. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, a psychologist who had been among the hostages and who had dedicated her career to studying trauma recovery, had published groundbreaking research on resilience and post-traumatic growth that was being used to help survivors of various crises rebuild their lives. Her work had been directly influenced by her observations of how Sarah and the other law enforcement personnel had handled the psychological challenges of the extended crisis. What I learned from watching Director Chen and her colleagues during those 14 hours, Dr. Harrison explained in her latest research publication, was that exceptional performance under pressure comes not from superhuman abilities, but from thoroughly human qualities like preparation, dedication, and care for others. These are qualities that can be developed and taught.
The technological innovations that had resulted from the Meridian Tower operation were continuing to advance. The precision rifle systems, advanced optics, and communication equipment that had been refined based on Sarah's experience were now incorporating quantum computing, predictive analytics, and environmental sensors that could enhance accuracy and decision-making beyond what any individual officer could achieve alone. The international criminal organizations that law enforcement agencies now faced were more sophisticated than the Carpathian Syndicate had been, but the capabilities developed from that crisis were enabling successful operations against threats that would have been impossible to address 15 years earlier. The intelligence sharing, tactical coordination, and specialized training that had emerged from Sarah's experience were protecting millions of people from criminal threats they would never know existed. The economic impact of the enhanced security measures and training programs had been substantial, with conservative estimates suggesting that the techniques and protocols developed from the Meridian Tower crisis had prevented over $50 billion in criminal activity and saved thousands of lives in operations around the world. Sarah's personal journey had been one of continuous growth and service. Her marriage to Dr. Michael Chen, a trauma surgeon she had met during the medical response to the crisis, had been blessed with 2 children who are now pursuing their own careers in public service. Her daughter is studying criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy, while her son is training to become a paramedic. The Memorial Scholarship Fund established by the hostage survivors had grown into a major source of funding for law enforcement training and research. The hundreds of officers who had received education and training through the fund were serving in communities worldwide, carrying the lessons of the Meridian Tower crisis into their daily work of protecting and serving others. The policy changes that had resulted from the congressional investigation were still influencing law enforcement and security practices. The federal agencies that had been reformed and strengthened following the crisis were now better equipped to address the complex transnational threats that characterize modern criminal activity. The building security standards that had been developed after the crisis were now implemented in major facilities worldwide. The architectural and technological improvements that had been inspired by analysis of the Carpathian Syndicate's methods were protecting countless buildings and the people who worked in them from similar attacks. The psychological support systems for law enforcement officers had been revolutionized based on research conducted on the long-term effects of the crisis on all personnel involved. The comprehensive mental health resources that were now standard in police departments worldwide were helping officers maintain their effectiveness and well-being throughout careers that regularly exposed them to extreme stress and danger. Sarah's influence on the next generation of law enforcement professionals was perhaps her greatest legacy. The thousands of officers who had been trained in the techniques and principles she had developed were now training others, creating an exponential expansion of the lessons learned from those critical 14 hours. The precision shooting competitions that had been established in honor of the Meridian Tower operation were not just demonstrations of marksmanship skill, but celebrations of the discipline, preparation, and teamwork that made such precision possible under pressure. Sarah served as a judge at these events, but her focus remained on the character and dedication of the competitors rather than their technical abilities. The documentary films, books, and academic studies that had been produced about the Meridian Tower crisis had reached millions of people worldwide, but Sarah remained focused on the practical work of training and preparation rather than the recognition and fame that had followed her actions that night. As Sarah stood before the memorial wall on this 15th anniversary, she reflected on the weight of responsibility that had shaped every day since those 4 shots were fired. The knowledge that her actions had directly saved 156 lives remained both a source of pride and a reminder of the importance of the work that she and her colleagues continue to do. The future challenges facing law enforcement would undoubtedly be different from those posed by the Carpathian Syndicate. But the principles that enabled success at the Meridian Tower, preparation, precision, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life, even in the face of extraordinary danger, would remain relevant as long as there were those who sought to harm others and those who stood ready to stop them. The evening sun cast long shadows across the memorial garden as the anniversary service concluded. Family members of the survivors placed flowers at the memorial wall. Law enforcement officers from around the world saluted in honor of the professionalism displayed that night, and students of tactical operations pledged to carry the lessons learned into their own service. The 4 shots that Sarah had fired in 3.2 seconds 15 years earlier, but her true legacy was not measured in split-second actions, but in the lifetime of service, teaching, and dedication that had followed. The 165 lives saved that night had multiplied into thousands of lives protected by officers trained in the techniques and principles that had made that rescue possible. The story of the Meridian Tower crisis was not just about one night of terror and rescue. It was about the ongoing commitment to excellence, preparation, and protection that defined the best of law enforcement service. Sarah Chen's 4 shots had saved 156
lives, but her dedication to training others in the principles that had made those shots possible would save countless more in the years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.